Hi everybody, welcome back. This is the second in the tissues video series. You should have already watched the video about epithelial tissues. Today we're going to be talking about the other three types of tissue. As a review, epithelial cells form sheets that cover the body and line the body cavities. Some type of epithelial tissue form glands that secrete product. Connective tissue is quite different than epithelial tissue. You can see that stratified squamous epithelium is shown on the left side of the picture, and the epithelial cells are densely packed. However, in the picture on the right, connective tissue cells can be seen much more spread out, and the tissue is characterized by a lot of loose space. Connective tissue is covered by another tissue and has a lot of different functions and different structure. Connective tissue serves to protect the body, bind and support organs, connect different body parts, produce blood cells, stores fat and various nutrients and minerals, and also houses the immune system. Connective tissue is the most abundant tissue in the body by weight. Even though there are a lot of different types of connective tissue, they all share a common characteristic. All connective tissues are made up of living cells in a non-living matrix. We'll talk about the cells in a minute. First, let's discuss the matrix. The matrix is made up of protein fibers and ground substance. All the different connective tissues have varying amounts of the three protein fibers. The first type of protein fiber are collagen fibers. Collagen fibers are made up of the protein collagen. These are really thick, strong fibers and resist pulling. You can see the thick pink fibers running through the tissue in the picture. You would find connective tissue that is a lot of collagen fiber in areas where we need to hold two parts together, like in the tendons or ligaments. You'd also find collagen fibers in areas that need a lot of reinforcement and strength, like bone. Elastic fibers are our second type of fiber. These are very stretchy and allow for recoil in the tissue. You can see the twisty, dark fibers in the image. You would find connective tissue that has a lot of elastic in it in places where you need the tissue to pull back into place, like the lungs or blood vessel walls. The last type of protein fiber are reticular fibers. These form branching networks of fiber, like a little mesh bag, and help to support and hold together organs and other structures in the body. The very thin, dark, branched lines in the image are reticular fibers. You would find connective tissue with a lot of reticular fibers wrapped around the spleen or the lymph nodes. By varying the amount of each of these fibers, you can change the structure and therefore the functions of the different types of connective tissue. The image we have been looking at has about the same amount of all three types of fibers, but I can show you images of a tissue that is mostly collagen fibers and one that is mostly reticular fibers. The darker dots in the photos are the living cells that are within each tissue. Let's talk more about these cells. The cells in connective tissue produce and secrete the matrix. Many of the types of connective tissue have their own specialized connective tissue cell. In a developing fetus, mesenchymal cells will differentiate into the different types of connective tissue cells. These cells start out as an immature cell that creates the matrix of the tissue. Once the matrix has been made, the cell becomes a mature cell that helps to take care of or maintain the matrix. Different types of tissues have different types of tissue cells. For example, bones contain osteocytes. Cartilage contains chondrocytes, and fat is made up of adipocytes. Before each of the cells mature, they go through a period where they are building the matrix of their tissue. All connective tissue cells arise from mesenchymal stem cells during development. Immature bone cells build the matrix of bone, and we call them osteoblasts. Once the bone is created, the bone cell becomes an osteocyte, and its job is to maintain the matrix. Other connective tissue cells contain a blast phase as well. So, fibroblasts are general connective tissue cells that create the matrix in general connective tissue. They then mature into fibrocytes. Chondroblasts create cartilage and mature into chondrocytes once the building is done. Go ahead and pause the video. Take a look at these cells. These are all cells that live within one of the types of connective tissue. The other component of the matrix is ground substance. This is what fills in the area between the cells and the protein fibers. The ground substance can be fluid, semi-fluid, gelatinous, or calcified. The three types of fibers plus the ground substance together makes up the matrix. We can organize the types of connective tissue into two main types: embryonic, which is connective tissue cell in the fetus, and adult. We can further separate adult connective tissue into three different types: connective tissue proper, supporting connective tissue, and liquid connective tissue. Let's go through each of these types. Embryonic connective tissue is either mesenchymal, which is going to create all of the connective tissue cells in the adult, or mucus. Mucus connective tissue makes up the umbilical cord. For adult connective tissues, the first one is areolar. This is very similar to the picture I showed you before. It has sort of an even amount of all of the three different types of fibers. The cells that make and maintain this type of tissue are fibroblasts, and you would find this type of tissue around organs and under the skin. Adipose connective tissue is very distinct. Each of the cells is filled with a large globule of fat. This type of tissue helps to store fat and insulate against heat loss. It also serves to protect the body by providing padding. You would find this type of tissue around the kidneys, behind the eyes, and around the heart. The connective tissue cells in this tissue are adipocytes. Reticular connective tissue has a lot of reticular fibers in it. These form kind of a mesh bag around organs to help protect them and hold them together. You would find reticular connective tissue around the liver and the spleen. The cells in reticular connective tissue are reticulocytes. There are two types of dense connective tissue: dense regular and irregular. Both of them contain primarily collagen fibers, which make them very strong. Dense regular connective tissue has all of the fibers running in the same direction. This gives massive amounts of strength in one direction, but they're actually quite weak in the other direction. We use dense regular connective tissue in our ligaments, which hold two bones together, or tendons, which hold a muscle to a bone. Dense irregular connective tissue also has a lot of collagen fibers. However, they all run in different directions. This allows this type of connective tissue to have strength in multiple directions, and you would find it in the dermis. Elastic connective tissue is made up of primarily elastic fibers. This is used in areas where you need a lot of recoil, where the tissue is going to be stretched out and you need it to pull back into place. You would find elastic connective tissue in the walls of arteries, in your hollow organs, such as the heart and the stomach, and in the airways. The cells that create elastic connective tissue are fibroblasts. Let's move on to supportive tissue. Supportive tissue has lots of matrix and is more rigid than the connective tissues that we've previously discussed. The first type of supportive tissue is cartilage, and there are three types of cartilage. The first one's hyaline cartilage. Hyaline cartilage is made by chondrocytes. The chondrocytes create the matrix, and they sort of wall themselves into little caves within the matrix. Those little caves are called lacuna. You can see here a chondrocyte which has matured and lives within a little cave called a lacuna in the matrix. Hyaline cartilage is very smooth and has a glassy appearance. You would find hyaline cartilage on the ends of the long bones. The embryonic skeleton is also created of hyaline cartilage. All three types of cartilage tend to have a poor blood supply, so it takes a long time to repair cartilage. The fibrocartilage is another type of cartilage. This one functions in shock absorption. You would find it between the vertebra in an intervertebral disc. We also see fibrocartilage in the knees, functioning as a shock absorber. The chondrocytes in fibrocartilage also live in lacuna. The last type of cartilage is elastic cartilage. This is also made by cells called chondrocytes, which live inside the lacuna. Elastic cartilage maintains the shape of the structure. You would find this in the auricle of the ear and the epiglottis. Osseous tissue, or bone, is the strongest, stiffest of all of the connective tissues. When you look at osseous tissue, you can see little rings of material, kind of like the rings of a tree trunk. These rings are called osteons, and that is the basic unit of compact bone. In the middle of each osteon is a central canal. This is where blood vessels and neurons run through the bone. Bones have an excellent blood supply, which is why you can break one and it gets repaired within a few weeks. Each of the rings is called a lamella. The osteocyte is the mature cell and lives within a lacuna. Blood is also a connective tissue, but one that has a completely fluid matrix. It still satisfies the definition of connective tissue. There are living cells, red and white blood cells, that are in a non-living matrix, which is the plasma of the blood. Blood is responsible for transporting gases, waste, nutrients, etc. The red blood cells, white blood cells, and platelets are the solid part of blood. These are called the formed elements. Blood cells are produced in the red bone marrow, in a specific kind of tissue called hematopoietic tissue. In a child, most of the bone marrow is red bone marrow because they are making a lot of blood cells. As we age, we have less and less red bone marrow, and that space is put to good use in storing fat. The bone marrow that stores fat is called yellow bone marrow. Let's talk about membranes. Membranes are generally made up of both epithelial tissue and connective tissue. These are flat sheets that cover or line parts of the body. There are 4 types of membranes in the body. We've already discussed serous membranes, so let's start there. Serous membranes cover cavities that do not directly open to the exterior. We know that the visceral layer lies closest to the organ, while the parietal layer is closer to the body wall. Serous membranes are made up of a sheet of simple squamous epithelium and areolar connective tissue underneath. These secrete serous fluid into the space between the parietal and the visceral layer. Mucous membranes line areas of the body that are open to the outside. This pretty much encompasses all of the digestive and respiratory tracts and reproductive tract and most of the urinary tract. Mucous membranes are made up of an epithelial layer plus a basement membrane and areolar connective tissue underneath. The cutaneous membrane is what covers the body. This is your skin. It consists of 2 layers of tissue, a layer of stratified squamous epithelium over a layer of connective tissue made up of dense irregular connective tissue and areolar tissue. Our last membrane is a synovial membrane. This is going to line the cavities of your movable joints. Synovial membranes are made up of synoviocytes, which are connective tissue cells, plus a basement membrane over more connective tissue. The synoviocytes secrete the synovial fluid that helps to lubricate and nourish the cartilage covering the bones. It is interesting to note that the synoviocytes are connective tissue cells, not epithelium. So the synovial membrane is the only one that does not contain epithelial cells. We have 2 more types of tissue which we're going to cover very briefly here and in more depth later in the course. Muscular tissue has 3 different types of tissue. Skeletal muscle tissue is striated, multinucleated, and voluntary. What this means is that this makes up your voluntary muscles, the muscles that move your body. It has these striations in it, and each muscle fiber or muscle cell has more than 1 nucleus. Cardiac muscle cells, however, are a little bit different. While they are striated, they only contain a single nucleus, and cardiac muscle cells are branched and involuntary. One feature that cardiac muscle cells have is that they contain intercalated discs. You can see these as dark lines going horizontally on the picture. The intercalated discs contain gap junctions, which, if you remember, are little tunnels that allow for very rapid communication between cells. Smooth muscle is not striated. It looks very smooth. This is also involuntary and also has a single nucleus per muscle fiber. Smooth muscle fibers are found in the stomach, intestines, urinary bladder, arteries, and iris of the eyes. Our last type of tissue is nervous tissue. Nervous tissue consists of large neurons, which serve to carry communications from one part of the body to another, and lots of supporting cells called neuroglia. In the nervous system, 10% of the cells are the neurons, and 90% of the cells are neuroglia. That's it for today. See you in class.